Super. So please, Athanasios, if you want to.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi there. Well, it is a great honor and a great pleasure for me to introduce Hans-Bernd Schäfer. I'm a lawyer. My expertise is public law and legal theory. It is well known that Hans-Bernd Schäfer has done as much as anyone alive to spread the learning of law and economics across Europe. Moreover, he has helped jurists and social scientists to understand how law works and presents itself. Law is not just law in books, blueprint. It deals with behavior, expectations, incentives. You'll never understand how the European Union works by reading the European treaties. And there's no way to unlock the European treaties by simply reading them. However, norms are important for law, especially when they are ignored. What are the costs and resources for choosing them, making, following, disregarding, enforcing, or changing them? In Schäfer's bibliography, you will find works on regulation and how to escape it, and on how the courts react to such an escape, or on nudging and liberal paternalism. Schäfer looks at the choice of legal rules from an economic perspective. But this analysis goes beyond the relevance of law for the economy. He pays attention on how choice of legal rules affects individual behavior. Is it wealth creating or wealth destroying? And he thinks that any analysis has to focus on this aspect, as otherwise the social consequences of legal norms remain unknown. And little can be said about whether the consequences of one rule are socially better than those of another rule. His method is to analyze the efficient solution to a problem first, and then ask whether a particular rule or standard gives incentives to reach it. Let me give you some examples of Schäfer's problem-oriented way of thinking. Take the problem of the following double trust dilemma. Innovative businesses unite capital and new ideas, which requires overcoming the following dilemma. Investors fear losing their wealth, and innovators fear losing their ideas. Using the corporate form, innovative business ventures can often be organized so that innovators expect to earn more from their share of profits than from stealing the investors' money. And investors expect to earn more by preserving the company's secrets than by disseminating them. Here you see that the existence of a behavioral pattern of the corporate form is presented as a solution to a real problem. Moreover, Schäfer says that legal norms can be precise rules which allow for mechanical decisions by judges and civil servants. Alternatively, they can be vague, mission-oriented standards, which delegate decisions from the maker of the law to the judiciary and the administration. Rules are those legal commands which differentiate legal from illegal behavior in a simple and clear way. Standards, however, are general legal criteria which are unclear and fuzzy and require complicated judiciary decision-making. Precise rules economize on the costs of adjudication and administration. Vague standards economize on the costs of norm specification. Now, how do this distinction apply in low-income countries? In low-income countries with a relatively low level of training, it is, according to Schäfer, efficient to concentrate human capital to specify precise legal norms, which can easily be adjudicated and administered, but might be inflexible. Another point in Hans-Bernd Schäfer's thought is, if you have different institutions, you will have different law. This is why history, professionalization, scientificization, conceptualization are important. A large body of Schäfer's work is related to the analysis of existing legal concepts, such as negligence or strict liability, and to possible legal innovations, he finds that an important impact for economic development was not primarily the content of Roman law, but the rise of law faculties in universities and the emergence of a legal method developed by glossators and commentators in their interpretation of the sources of Roman law and canon law. My last example is a crucial point in law and a central point in Schäfer's work, and that is the role of information. According to Schäfer, information is observer dependent. An audit, and consequently auditor's liability, has a different function in primary and in secondary capital markets. In primary markets, the audit serves to reduce the problem of asymmetric information between the well-informed seller and the uninformed outside investor. In secondary markets, there is no asymmetric information between the sellers and the buyers. So, as you can easily see, in Hans-Bernd Schäfer's work, law and economics is much more than the relation between law and the economy. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to listening to the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for your introduction, for a very gracious introduction, and I'm glad that you seemingly have read some of my papers, so thank you very much. My talk today is based on two papers which are both co-authored. I have written one paper on privatization of police and the consequences of privatization of police with my colleague, my law colleague at the Bucerius Law School in Hamburg, Michael Fehling. That has been published a couple of weeks ago in a handbook at Cambridge University Press. And in that paper, some of the ideas are already included in what I'm talking about today. And there is another work in progress together with Ram Singh. Ram Singh is a professor of economics at the Delhi School of Economics, also specializing like me in law and economics, and with a very, sophisticated mathematical background. And we are working, trying to expand this paper, which is already published, which I wrote with Michael Fehling. So my paper is basically on the differences between an idea about police work. I'm talking about crime fighting, so it's all about crime fighting. A police mission of the police, according to which the police should be market oriented. That is, the police is a public good. That is the theory. And when you have public goods, then you have state agencies which try to mimic a perfect market. So that is one way of looking at the police. And then if that is the case, if you want to have efficient police, then the concept of equality, which plays a role here, is that you want to have an equality of the marginal cost of the police and the marginal reduction of crime losses from crime. And another concept about crime fighting police is not the efficient police, but an equal security police, which tries to organize a situation in which every citizen, or more precisely, not only every citizen, every resident in a state has the same security against crime, especially against violent crimes. And that is another point. And I want to show that first that the that the police as a, as a kind of market or market mimicking thing is not in line with modern legal thinking, and that even the idea that the police is not, is a public good is it's had some merits, but if one looks closer at it, then one sees that private police forces or private security has always played a big role. So that the market failure theory of explaining the existence of private police has to be criticized, even though I have checked this in the, in the standard literature on law and economics. It is widely supported by some of the most prominent law and economic scholars, like Richard Posner. In 1985, in a paper, he said that crime fighting is simply an extension of tort law, and tort law, there's little discussion among law and economic scholars that tort law should follow an efficiency rationale. But Gary Becker, in an interview in 2013, had the same. And then we have the well-known textbook by Kuta and Ulen, the last edition, and Polinsky, also the last edition. They also support this view that the role of criminal law, but especially also the role of police forces, is to reduce crimes to an efficient level. That is to a level in which $1 spent on police reduces the crime rates by $1. And legal historians have, however, questioned this public good theory. I call Rosenthal 2003, Enion 2009. Rosenthal has pointed, I think he's an American, American law scholar, and he pointed to the fact that both in the United States, but also in England, up to the late 18th century, and even partly in the 19th century, police was privately, not publicly financed. It was basically privately organized, and that a public police is a relatively, in historical perspective, of course, not in the, if we go back 20 or 50 or 100 years, but in historical perspective, that is what Rosenthal says, is a relatively new phenomenon. And today, when we look at the figures today, we can also see that worldwide there are now more than almost 50 countries in which the number of police, of private security forces, is higher than that of public police officers. And that is especially so in the United States, but also in China, in Russia, in South Africa, in the United Kingdom. This is very not so much on the European continent, but we have many countries in which private police forces, of course, with some reduced competencies, are working for the internal security. Well, this is one observation. The other observation is that contemporary constitutional lawyers reject the normative goal of efficient crime fighting. Well, the public lawyers have never dealt very much with law and economics, also with the theory of crime, one has to say, but they had the view of public lawyers about crime and about the mission of the police was that security is a state task, and it is open to the state to decide what that means. So there is no, it is an open word, you know, law and order is open to democratic decisions and to decisions of the government. But over the last 40 years, I would say, starting with the 1980s, public lawyers, I mean, when I talk here about public lawyers, I mean mainly constitutional lawyers, have proposed an equal human right of security. And they derive this from constitutions, and I will show you a little bit about their arguments here. So what I want here to show is first examine the equal security mission for police as a policy target derived from fundamental constitutional rights, then identifying and then showing what the difference is and what kind of properties equal rights, equal security for all has. And then we try to identify trade-offs between equal security and other legitimate policy targets. So this paper is more on an analytical level, even though it also proposes or supports the view of lawyers, of constitutional lawyers, to you know, who argue that the mission should be equal security. Then we try to provide a rigorous analysis of these trade-offs. So that is basically what I want to do. Now, when I come now back to the human right as the starting point of this mission of equal security for all. And this has to do with a reinterpretation of what human rights are. You know, we have human rights since the French Revolution. They were then introduced in the United States, and then later on became part of the constitution of almost or many states, at least the Western states. And they were originally where human rights were exclusively regarded as defensive rights against the state. Defensive right against the state, against my freedom, against my political convictions, against my freedom of religion, and so on. And these were rights against the state, defensive rights. So law and order was not related to human rights only in the sense that when the state decides, you know, some particular police activities, about particular police activities, then the citizen might have rights against this when it encroaches his human rights, for instance, the protection of his home, his privacy, and so on. So in that sense, human rights always played a role, but law and order was not by itself regarded as being derived from human rights. And that has changed. There are now many public lawyers, I mean constitutional lawyers, which interpret constitution in such a way that they derive from basic constitutional rights also a basic right for security. And as you might know, basic constitutional rights are always by definition equal rights. Then this right to security is an equal a right to equal security, and that is an international phenomenon which we can observe. And I have checked the literature a bit, also the literature in my own country, in Germany, but also the literature in other countries as far as I could follow them. It's very difficult to follow the literature, so I could only follow the literature which is was written in either German or in English language. But I know that there are much of the legal scholarships is in the national language. So this is what comes now is not complete or so, but it gives you still a view. So for instance, here I have some German scholars, and we have much more literature on this, but these are some very prominent, I would say prominent legal scholars. And one pioneering article here on this was by Isensee, who is a professor in Munich, a very well-known constitutional lawyer. And he wrote a paper on the basic right to security, in which he argued that that is not a new idea. He argued basically that the human rights are not, as we think about them in a traditional way, exclusively defensive rights against an encroaching state, but human rights are also rights to get something from the state. There are also participation rights. That is not a new development, but I would say a development which is not much older than about 50 years in the theory of the Constitution and the theory of human rights. So when we talk today about human rights, then I think that most public and constitutional lawyers would agree that human rights are not only defensive rights against the state, but also participatory rights, and that therefore the state has to deliver some services to guarantee these rights. And as rights are the same for everybody, these are always equal rights. And from this idea, there is not a big step. It's I think only a small step to say that there exists a basic right to security. You know, I'm myself not a lawyer, but I discussed this in great detail with my colleague Fehrman from Bucerius Law School, and he says that this is now this theory, which was introduced by Isensee, is now the general view. Roberts, for instance, wrote a paper on security as a human right. Guzzi also on a right to equal security. We don't have this right in the Constitution, so there is no constitutional. No, we have a Bill of Rights in our Constitution, but this Constitution is not. And there is no right of equal security for all. You don't find that in the Constitution, but it is derived from other constitutional rights like freedom, like participation, you know, to be in public places, they must be secure. So from other rights in the Constitution, it is derived that the German Constitution demands equal security. Jutta Limbach, she was the president for several years of the German Constitutional Courts, also wrote a paper which supported this view. And this is insofar interesting as these people here, for instance, Isensee and Limbach, if you look at them from a political point of view, then Isensee is more a quite conservative lawyer, where Limbach belongs to the more progressive lawyers, but they all wrote in the same direction. So there's a large, this is an opinion which is widely shared. And Lepsius, he made it very clear. He writes, this is all my translations from German, that he writes that security is not a state duty. Then the state could himself decide what that means, but is an equal right. There exists an equal right to security. Now, in the USA, the Lawrence Rosenthal, in a very nice paper, which I liked very much, he, and I mentioned him already before, because he has these, had these information about private police in England and in the also in the New England states before the United States were founded. And he also proposes equal security, and he says it can be deducted from the 14th Amendment, that is the Equal Protection Clause. And he argues, Rosenthal argues, that this is not limited to securing equality with respect to particular civil rights. And he says criminal law belongs to that. And he says that even the most, the most obvious type of protection that the government provides under the law is the protection against lawbreakers. So here is one prominent voice in the United States, which also calls for an equal right. Then in Australia, we have also related literature. Here, Lewis and Salem argue for Australia that providing effective equal protection against crimes is a constitutional norm. And these two authors had also some knowledge of law and economics, unlike all the other authors which I have cited so far. They reject, by concentrating here on equal right, they reject explicitly the market mimicking rationale for public police forces. Here also, Australia, they, also argue in favor of an equal right against crime. In Brazil, I found only one paper in English language, but Laura Chinchilla, 2003, argues that equal security is a constitutional norm in Brazil, also by way of interpretation. And for Israel, I have found two authors, Alon Harel and Gideon Parchomowski. They argue for equal security in an interesting paper, which, however, they say equal security should be the policy goal, but they, in that paper, at least, they do not relate this to the Constitution. They do that is open, but also they do not ask for efficient, but of equal security. Now, in Europe, in the European Union, we have today a Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, in which this idea became already codified. It was explicitly codified in Article 6 of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. In Article 6, you can read, everyone has the right to liberty and security of person. And here you have it black and white, so it's not deducted in a way as all the others authors, but we have it here in the European in the EU Bill of Rights. And of course, because all rights, all fundamental rights are equal rights, that is, security is a right to equal security. Also, the Fundamental Rights Survey of the EU regards personal security and safety as key issues in ensuring human rights. So on the political level, you have also this thinking. And I give you two more practical examples from practical politics. The UN had some oversight in Kosovo, and was also in charge for security question. The Security Council writes in a resolution about the Kosovo of 2004, the Security Council urges promotion of equal security for all inhabitants of Kosovo. And in Germany, we have this this practical dimension. So it is not just an academic discussion, but it has reached a policy. For instance, the coalition agreement of the Grand Coalition, which now comes to its end, of 2018, in this coalition agreement, they had one sentence which fits to this. Offer equal security everywhere. There must be no zones of different security in Germany. Now, as you perhaps know, and those who are not Germans, we have now Germany is again forming a new federal government, and in the coalition agreement, which is just 2 weeks old, which I read, between the Social Democrats and the Liberals and the Green Party, they have one section in which they demand equal security for all. So I just took a little time here to explain this, that this is first a worldwide development. It derives from participatory equal rights for the state, and that is a development which is very influential in across countries. Now I want to delve a bit into the question what equal security means and why it is a development in which the trade-offs with other also important policy goals are not so far as I can see it, are not fully analyzed. And our paper tries to not to only promote this concept of equal security, but also to see that it is not without problems. Now, let me first say that if the method of equality for a market mimicking police is equal loss reduction of every marginal dollar spent on crime avoidance in all police districts. Now, when you take the usual assumptions about the costs or the investment or the expenditures which you invest in any police districts, that is that the crimes go down, and but with diminishing returns. Then you simply want to minimize the sum total of the losses from crime and the police costs, and then you get an optimal police budget in which in each police district you have an optimal budget depending on the conditions in a police district. So that would be the optimal police budget in a market mimicking police. But the measure of equality of a constitutionally informed public police is not efficient security, but equal security of every resident in all police districts of the state. A perfect market for private police leads to efficient avoidance of losses of crime it can, well, it can, but usually it cannot lead to equal security. I will show you that it can, the two under certain conditions, but very unrealistic condition can go hand in hand. And I just want to illustrate this. Now assume that you have two districts, a high income districts and a low income districts. And assume also that the losses from crime are higher in the high income district for two reasons. The losses from crime are first, for instance, take burglary or robbery or something. There is an involuntary transfer of wealth from one person to another person. That is one cost of crime, so to speak. And then, but there is also the chilling effect of being a victim from crime, being a victim of a, let's say, a violent crime, and then the willingness to pay for not being a victim from crime is, of course, a cost of crime, and that is higher in the high income district than in the low income district. In the low income district, you might have hotspots, but a low willingness to pay for security. So it might be that in the high income district, you have the efficient amount might be very high because the willingness to pay for police is high in the high income district. And in the low income district, you might have many crimes, similar crimes, but the willingness to pay is much lower because people have a lower income, and therefore the transfers, the involuntary transfers are lower, but they have also a lower willingness to pay for police forces. So if then the state mimics the market, then much of the police forces will go into the high income district and less into the low income district. This is not necessarily so, but it's just an illustration that usually equal security and efficient security are not the same. They can be the same, but usually they are not the same. Now, equal security can violate another also constitutional value, that is non-discrimination. That is, now, what does that mean here in this context? Non-discrimination means usually that that the state organs should, or not only state organs, but here state organs, they should not discriminate on the basis of race, of religion, of sex, of ethnicity, and so on. There should be no discrimination. Now, usually when we talk about discrimination, we have two different concepts in mind. There is one concept in which those who discriminate has, as Gerrit Becker has once put it, have a taste for discrimination. So they simply dislike, for instance, people from other communities, or they dislike foreigners, or they dislike other religions or whatever. So they have a taste for discrimination. In our paper, we exclude this, the taste for discrimination. So we assume that in the whole paper that there is no taste for discrimination among the police, but the police is, let's say, with regard, for instance, is totally colorblind, is not does not discriminate because of a taste of discrimination. We focus here on what the economists, but also lawyers, call statistical discrimination. And I have to go a little bit into this because that is an important thing. So we are not dealing with hate discrimination, for instance. Statistical discrimination means here that the policy target of equal crime rates, necessarily, sometimes necessary, not necessary, but often, depending on parameters, but more often than not, discriminates against minorities in terms of a statistical discrimination. And I want to show by way of an example what I mean with this. It means here following. Assume, for instance, you have two police districts, and these two police districts are the same, they are homogeneous. Then this would the consequence would be that you reach equal security if the state allocates the same number of police forces in both police districts. Then there can be no discrimination, of course. But now assume, on the contrary, that the one district remains exactly the same, but the other district changes, and it is now in the second district there live immigrants. There only, for the sake of argument, assume that we have now two districts. In one district live the non-immigrants, and the other the immigrants. And in the immigrant district, you have a much higher crime rate at each level of police forces, not because the immigrants are more criminal than the local population, but because they are younger. And we know that most crime comes from young people at the age of between, let's say, 60 and 33, 34, that concentrates there. And now assume that the immigrants are young people dominate, then it is quite clear that even if they would be otherwise totally the same, homogeneous, then simply the fact that they are younger makes them more criminal. And then, of course, to reach the goal of equal security, you must concentrate the police forces in the second district where the criminals are. So then police forces are concentrated there, but to reach now an efficient and equal law, you must even redistribute police forces from the first district to the second district, to the high crime district. So the crime rate increase in the first district, but in the other district, they go down until they are equal. But this has then the consequence, not necessary, but often the consequence of discrimination, of statistical discrimination, in the sense that the probability of a criminal to be punished, to be caught and punished, will be higher in the second districts. So, for instance, if you then look, let's say you might have 50% people living in one district and 50% in the other district, but you catch many more criminals in the second district and less than before in the first district, and the result is that the prisons are full of immigrants, but only a few locals are sitting in the prison. That is, and this happens or can happen even if the police has no taste for discrimination. It is just they fulfill their task. So I have this here now. I show you how we have modeled this. We assume that there are L police districts, and for simplicity's sake, we assume that there is a police, that each district has a population of P. These are parameters. And we also assume that only one crime exists. That is, we assume that we deal with violent crimes, and that one can, however, in the model, assume there is one indexed crime. So there is one crime, for instance, one felony can be and property crime and so on. And then the police districts, within police districts, there is homogeneity in terms of the loss from a crime. That is, the losses from crime differ across police districts, but within one police district they are the same. And then the variables are now the number of crimes in every district. Yeah, every district, and the police expenditures also in every district. And then we have the usual assumption for the first and second order condition. First order condition is smaller than 1, and second order condition is larger, or I should say it can also be equal to 0. Here, this is again then the conditions for efficient security. Simply maximizing the total costs here. You know, here we have here the total costs, the number of crimes as a function of the police expenditures, x1, multiplied with the parameter, this is the loss from crime, plus N2, the number of crimes in District 2, and so on. And you maximize this, and then you get here the first order condition and get an optimal level here of crimes, of police forces, sorry, police expenditures. And equal level of security means this here. The number of crimes in District 1 should be the same as the number of crimes in District 2. And now, of course, X can be very different. And this is, of course, now subject to a budget constraint here. The budget constraint, there is now a budget. With efficient police, you don't have this budget a problem of thinking about what the budget is, because the budget is just the sum of all efficient police expenditures over all, you know, so the sum in all districts. That would be the optimal budget. But here, equality does not tell us much about the optimal budget. So we have now two decisions to take. One is the equal security, and the other independent decision is now how much security do we want to have. These are now, instead of one decision, these are two different decisions. And these decisions, you know, how the police forces are distributed, given the budget, that is a police task, and making the budget is, of course, a task of parliament and might be government to some extent. Now there is however, there is a lower bound on the budget that we can say. Now assume, for instance, that you have again two police districts, and in one police district without police, where we have two police but no police, and in one district the number of crimes is 100, and the other is only 50. Then to reach equal security, you have to channel all the money into the second district, and you reach at some point of the budget, you reach then equal security, which is, however, would be compatible with a situation in which all police forces are spent in one district and no police forces are working in the other district. Now we also try to rank here. This is a ranking. Here we ask, we have again the two police districts, and here the number of crimes without police is here smaller than the number of crimes without police in District 2. And then, you know, we have here, we have these two functions. We have here X, the police, the expenditures for the police. These are the number of crimes, sorry. The number of crimes. And you have here two functions, and it is clear that now we have to spend this, whatever the budget is, we have to spend it in such a way that the number is the same in both districts. There are, I mean, this, I can perhaps skip this, but this is a very simple calculation in which we show that efficient and equal security are the same. Of course, they are the same when for the function, you know, the function between the number of crimes and the police expenditures, when you have a when the first derivative is the same in both cases, and then of course you'll get the same. But this is a very this is an exceptional case, and normally the two are different. And also here we have, so these are two propositions which we derive, which show under which conditions efficient and equal crime can be the same. And of course, it is that is the case if the first derivative of these functions are everywhere the same. Equal security and non-discrimination. There we have also a possibility condition here that here P is the probability. Pi here is the probability that in the police district I, a criminal who committed a crime, will be caught and punished. So that is, if you have 100 crimes and 50 people are caught, then P is 0.5, and P must be the same for equal security. For non-discrimination, P must be the same across district. And then you have here the condition that under which this applies, that is under which equal security leads to equal probability of being punished. And that is also under very unlikely conditions. Usually it leads to discrimination. So now I want to, I think I have to come to the end, but I need some more, couple of minutes. So equal security violates non-discrimination, and I have come across some literature, some in the United States, some papers who question, even for the United States, that the police is on the basis of statistical evidence that police is racist in the sense of having a taste for discrimination. But they say that is also a consequence, to the most part, a consequence of a particular police strategy. I don't believe this, but there is some literature on that in that direction. Inclusive benevolence, that would simply mean that with public police, no resident should be less secure than without public police, and the same policy rationale applies also for the increase of the police budget. But it is clear that this inclusive benevolence of, let's say, having more police forces leads to more security for everybody, or at least not to less security for some people. That is, of course, not the case. So if, for instance, if we have more immigrants, and therefore if then for the reasons which I explained before, the police forces must be increased in one district and decreased in another district, then this leads to more security in one district and less in the other district. And this is, of course, still this effect becomes even bigger if we have spillover effects. We have a model which I don't show here. Then when you have spillover effects, that is, if you concentrate the police, then the criminals might go to another district, and then all in all, this implies that inclusive benevolence of increasing the police forces is not guaranteed. Effectiveness is also not guaranteed. Well, effectiveness the marginal spending for police should have the same effect on crime reduction in every police district, and this effectiveness is, of course, the precondition for the effect that given the police budget, the total police budget, you could argue that the police budget, with the police budget, you should minimize the number of crimes, but that is not guaranteed with the equal security rationale. That is a straightforward argument, I think. Another is minimal efficiency. Minimal efficiency would require that the police budget should not be lower than the willingness to pay for the police in the lowest income district, let's say, but not higher than in the highest income district, and both is not guaranteed. And one could ask whether it is debatable whether minimal efficiency is at all a policy goal. For instance, I give you an example. We have now in Germany, we have hate crimes against Jewish citizens. Some very, it is on the rise, and the Jewish citizens, they do not feel safe enough. And now what the police does in the whole of Germany, they protect the Jewish institutions like schools and so on, which is of course very costly. And it might be that this is more costly than the Jewish community itself their willingness to pay would be. But what then the police officers can say to the Jewish community, they can say, well, we cannot guarantee your safety, their security, but what we can do is we can offer you living conditions in which you have the same level of security as everybody else. And that would, of course, violate minimal efficiency. Oops. Oh yeah, that is that was the end. I want to conclude with another point, which is not on my slides here. It is also that the discrimination is, of course, zero if there is no police budget. If the police budget is zero. But then it can be police. This equal security rationale can be very discriminating against minorities. But then if you increase the police budget and make it very, very high, then the discrimination again disappears. So if you would place one police person behind every citizen or every resident, then again discrimination disappears. But this is of course also not reasonable, not a reasonable policy, because then the state would disregard other important the support of other important basic rights. So that is also not a way out to increase the police budget above all levels. Yeah, well, I think that these are the basic ideas of what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah. Thank you very much for these very interesting insights and yeah, kind of counterintuitive probably and surprising, but we all have to face probably is that equal security, as long as it is efficient, it will not be free of discrimination or statistical discrimination, of course, but this is something we have to be aware of. So especially politicians. Do we have any discussion about this? Any comments on this or remarks? So Athanasius.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to make some remarks from a legal point of view. I think it would be useful because police action is already legally regulated. So in law, we distinguish between police action on street level, that's police law, and regulation. Regulation is about budget, is about legislating. What the legislator does, distributing resources, and the principles, the legal principles that apply, they are related or they are connected to different prerequisites. For example, the equality principle will apply in a different way to the legislator than to the police officer on the street. You have different decisions on that field. Then my question would be a double one. The first question is, what a perfect market for private police is a substitute for? Is it a substitute for the action of the police, of the public police on the street level, or is it a substitute for the organizational at the organization level? And then my second question, or I would like to say that when public police acts, they have what we call discretion. This discretion is a discretion, police discretion, as to whether they intervene and as to how they intervene, what kind of measures they take. And this is very important, has practical consequences. Why? Because you can't force the police to intervene. They will decide whether they do it or not, unless there is something extremely important. For example, you see there is an old lady which is beaten up by a criminal in front of the eyes of a policeman. He has to intervene. Otherwise, that's the only way. That's extremely difficult. So this is a thing about the discretion, and every measure that the policemen or the police officers take must be constitutionally proportionate and non-discriminating. And proportionally non-discriminating, that's the same problem for the legislator. Now,
Yeah.
only we have different levels. Is it about regulation, budget, distribution of resources, or is it about intervening on street level? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is a very important point, which, however, in my presentation, I did not touch upon much. Of course, when we look at private security, in German police laws, in Germany, police laws are state laws, so they are different in every state, somewhat different. But for instance, in the Bavarian police law, I think the mission of the police is defined as being repression and deterrence. Repression and deterrence. And repression is what you mentioned, the people on the street, boots on the street, observing and having people in hot spots and this kind of thing. That is usually what this repression, that is what the private security does in many countries. So they guard the campus, for instance, in the United States. It is usual that the campus security is organized by private security. The same in China and so on. Also, all the museums in China, they are all guarded by private police. Right. So that is repression. Deterrence is, is the ex post activity of the police. They try to find the perpetrators, the criminal, and to bring him to justice. So repression and deterrence is something which usually, at least in my country, cannot be transferred to private security. But there are differences across countries. So I read one paper from a US scholar about the private police on the campus of Pennsylvania University. Quite an interesting paper. But what I found interesting was that they hired private security personnel, and then this private security personnel was sworn in. So they got some official mission which allows them to use force and much more than normally private security people could do. So this differs across countries, but I think that at the end of the day we would all agree that public police, when it comes to the use of force, use of violence also, this is a prerogative for the state. And we have since Max Weber said that the state is defined by the only one who can use violence legitimately, and that is still a very an important point here when we talk about public and private police. But I have not delved into this, but it's of course a very important point.
So there's another hand raised by Ronald Winthrop.
Thank you for the paper. I think I understand the basic idea, which is that there's a conflict between minimizing the total damages from crime, which would be the Becker-style criterion.
Yes.
And equal protection, which is the European human rights criterion. But in the end, I think that's right. That's what you're saying. And I think that's true. And it's a very good point. My question would be, so in the end, do you have a way of reconciling these two objectives? So there's a certain sense in which, suppose you have two neighborhoods. One of them is a very high crime neighborhood, another one is very low crime. To minimize the total damages from crime, you're going to send more police to the minority neighborhood. And does that violate equal protection? They still won't be as protected as the people in the other neighborhood, but and there's a sense in which you want to spend more money in the high crime neighborhoods than the low crime neighborhoods. So it doesn't strike me that that by itself violates the equal protection criterion. It sort of goes some way towards doing that. So do you have some way of deciding what is the best way of reconciling the two criteria, minimizing the total damages from crime and equal protection?
Well, I think that you have a not only in this field or on this point, but you have when it comes to fundamental rights, which are equal rights by definition, you have often a trade or the efficiency criterion is not compatible with his equality criterion coming from equal human rights. I think that is, at the end of the day, is a trade-off which simply exists and which cannot be reconciled, except, you know, when we show that in the analytical part of our paper, that under certain parameter conditions, which however politics cannot change, you know, they can be reconciled. So what politics is, what one can say is this: assume that you have a country in which the state provides equal security in a reasonable sense, that, for instance, people in the low-income districts, they can use the public places, you know, you don't have everywhere gangsters running around and so on, so they feel secure, they and so on. They have the same a reasonable level of safety and security in their neighborhood. And this, of course, does not exclude that if you have this same and reasonable level of security across the whole country, that that then in the richer neighborhoods, security becomes much better by private investment, you know, private investment that can be physical investment, but it can also be investment in private police, or, you know, private security personnel, boots on the ground. But I'm sorry, I don't see that these two rationales can easily be reconciled. I have no clue to that, at least not at the moment. But of course, it's a very important point.
Okay, thank you.
I would have one question. Was there another hand raised by Mario? No, this was. I would have one question, probably very naive, and I don't know if this makes sense, but what goes through my mind all the time is you were talking about the willingness to pay for security. And I understand this efficiency criterion is independent from the pure willingness to pay, because this is just a question of the damage by crime, and the euro spent for police should not be more than what is avoided as a damage from crime. But you also bring this willingness to pay into account in your formulas. And of course, in a richer district, the willingness to pay for the security is higher, most probably in a pure district. But this is really the right measure, because willingness to pay also takes into account the ability to pay. And probably it's a little bit philosophical, but if you talk about such a basic human right as security, then isn't it a kind of unfair to talk about the ability or willingness to pay? Because in the poor districts, the people would probably have the same estimation of security if they would be able to. Yeah, to be robbed is probably for a poor man even worse because it's his last money than for a rich man who could afford it if it is not too worse, this robbery. So the pure estimation of security is probably not measured by the willingness to pay. Is this a problem?
Sure, yeah, sure, I fully agree. But if you look at the economic theory of public goods, then the argument is this, public goods, private goods can be offered in the market. Now, for instance, shoes are private goods. So we leave this to the market and we leave it to the consumers to decide according to their willingness to pay, given their incomes. When we talk about willingness to pay as economists, we always mean willingness to pay given the income. So that is ability, willingness to pay given the income. That is how we, and then we say, even if the market can lead to an efficient solution of producing shoes, and then we have this theory of public goods that we say, public goods have these. If the market offers public goods, there's an undersupply, because public goods, you cannot exclude people from public goods, and therefore you have always free riders. You have this free rider problem, and therefore we get the necessity to offer or produce public goods by the state. So that is the economic theory. But the state then should mimic the market. That is the rationale of public good. And what I just wanted to point out here as an important point is that the thinking of constitutional lawyers and constitutional law does not support this public good theory, which mimics the market, but comes to another rationale, namely the equal security. So, for instance, take as a representative crime, let's say armed robbery. So in the rich neighborhood, armed robbery, the people have more money in their pocket, so therefore the loss from crime is higher, and than in the other district. But also the chilling effect in terms of pain, if you could measure the pain directly, that would perhaps be the same in the rich and the poor district, but in terms of willingness to pay, it is much more. And if you mimic the market, you must take care of this, But if strive for equal security, it's a different thing.
Yeah. Okay. I understood. Yeah. Super. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't see any other risen hands, so I can just thank you, both of you. Thank you very much, and have a good evening together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.